Awesome. Looks like we're recording. So this is James Casey. So I'm welcoming everybody to our third of the VSGI speaker series for this semester. We've had some very interesting talks so far. We've got two more planned. We'll recount those at the end in case you didn't see them on the website. If you're watching this either there or live with us today. So we have an interesting one today. It's about developer advocacy. We have a special guest, Zachary Powell. I'm going to let Stephanie give a quick introduction of how they met, and then allow her to introduce our speaker, and then the speaker will talk. One thing that I will say, is if we have questions, we can ask them in chat, and we'll get to them after the conversation, the presentation, and we'll go from there. So Stephanie, you want to give a quick background on how you met and all that kind of stuff?
So I connected with Zachary over Twitter. This is actually the first time that we have conversed in person. I ended up following him just due to his funny takes on game development and coding and programming and things like that. And I enjoy a lot of what he has to say in regards to those topics. Zachary has 10 years experience in Android development and software engineering, and currently is the lead developer advocate for Huawei. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's close enough.
And from what I understand, I've never heard of this before I got in touch with Zachary, but apparently developer advocates are a developer's best friend, is from what I understand, and are very vital to helping developers be successful with new platforms and technology. But it would probably be better for him to tell it directly. So whenever you're ready, take it away, Zachary. Thanks.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, basically here today sort of talk about developer advocacy, why it's important, and possibly also why it might be a career that you want to look at in the future, or something you want to get more involved in, really. Let's see if we can just get the right window open. There we go. Okay, so as already sort of beautifully introduced, I am the lead developer advocate for Huawei's App Gallery Connect. App Gallery Connect is basically Huawei's app marketplace. So sort of Play Store or iOS have obviously the App Store. And we're basically focused on this sort of suite of tools called App Gallery Connect, which basically offer a range of SDKs and APIs and functionality around that, kind of like Google's Firebase, if it's something that you've ever sort of come across before. Lots of serverless and all that sort of fun stuff. So that's kind of what I'm up to. But before that, I was an Android developer, as you said, for about 10 years, and basically was focused on software development and kind of fell into DevRel, really. So I was looking for a new job, as you do, working with a recruiter, and they had a position come up for a developer advocate. The recruiter themselves had no idea what that meant or what that was. And but they sort of said, well, hey, it kind of looks interesting. It kind of matches your profile. They kind of line up together. So why don't you give it a go? And I went through the interview process. I loved what they had to say. And it was kind of never looked back since, really. I ended up starting a new team, as I mentioned, for App Gallery Connect, and moved into the lead position. And that's where I am now, and loving every second of it. So I've kind of gained quite a lot of experience over the past year or so directly on this, and also had the experience of coming from a place where I had no idea what this was about. And, even my recruiter had no idea what this was about. So it's not a topic that necessarily is covered as much as it should be. So when we talk about developer advocacy, we'll often talk about DevRel, or developer relations in general. And this is kind of a field which covers lots of different roles, but it's essentially that position where software development, product management, and marketing all meet together in the center. That can kind of change from company to company in terms of which of those three have a bigger emphasis. And that's often a good indication down to who you report to. In some companies, the DevRel team will report to the CEO and be much more software related. Others will report to the project management team, and some would report to marketing. It really depends on which emphasis the company is going on. But in some instance, all three of those things overlap to give you developer relations. Developer relations focus essentially on what we call the 3 C's. So code, content, and community. From the code point of view, if you're within developer relations, you're going to be interested in producing sample applications. You're going to be interested in producing sample code snippets, projects that showcase how to use that company's product. From a community point of view, you're going to be interested in, from a content point of view, you're going to be interested in producing documentation for the product, for blog posts, videos, demo labs, hackathons, presentations, much like this, that sort of content. I should say that when I say sort of product, that's going to vary from company to company as well. So you might, in one company within DevRel, be advocating for a particular SDK or a particular piece of software that a company is producing. That can very much vary as well. So we use product just as a kind of catch-all, because it will vary. And the third C is community. So a lot of DevRel will be involved in helping grow a developer community around a product, whether that might be because you're active on social media, whether you're forming some sort of like Discord server or Slack group or physical meetup groups. Obviously right now, that was in the last year much less, and we're much more focused on the online meetup groups, but traditionally, and probably moving forward again, physical in-person groups as well, a big part of that. So that's kind of the things that, broadly speaking, DevRel in general will look at. But what kind of companies actually will have a DevRel department or DevRel people? So overall, basically, that role of DevRel is connecting internal developers with the external developers. So you're bridging the gap between the people actually writing the software, the product, and the people that are going to be using it as developers. So in terms of who actually will have DevRel, it's obviously going to be a tech company. You've got to have some sort of developer product to push, but that might not necessarily be your main product. You might, for example, be a company like Twitter or Facebook or somewhere like that, where your main audience is the end user, but you have developer tools, SDKs, services that you want developers to be using. So they'll have a DevRel department, even though that isn't necessarily their main business focus. Whereas other companies might very well have that as their main business focus. Their business focus might be they have an IDE that they want you to use, or they have a piece of software that does X, Y, Z to make developers' lives easier. So it can really be a broad range of tech companies that will have some involvement in DevRel. And it also fits in lots of different types of developer projects and roles. So it could be something to do with cloud computing, it could be web development, it could be game engine design, it could be all sorts across the whole board. Basically, if there's tech involved, it's a good chance that there is some sort of DevRel going on. Traditionally, DevRel would definitely be more focused on larger companies that have the budget to support these kinds of roles. However, what we have seen in the past couple of years is a growing number of startups are kind of really understanding the value of DevRel and wanting to actually hire very early in their hiring cycles to get developer advocacy and DevRel going as soon as possible. I've spoken with people that are in startups that have got literally maybe 3 developers, and they're already looking at hiring a developer advocate. Really small companies really trying to start very early on because there's a lot of value there. And obviously, if you're in a small company, you're probably going to be the only DevRel person, and you're going to be involved in kind of handling all of that work, all those 3 C's that I kind of briefly talked about. But in a larger company, you might find that actually you're part of a much bigger group that maybe is a worldwide sort of setup, and will have lots of different roles involved. So you might have community managers, you might have developer evangelists, you might have technical writers, and you might then also have developer advocates. So what is a developer advocate then? Where does that fit in DevRel? Well, it's essentially kind of, I see it as the cornerstone of DevRel. It's often the first hire that will happen if a company is building out a DevRel team, because as the name suggests, you're basically the one that's advocating for developers. And that's a two-way street. So you're going to become someone that is an expert in that product and knows the product inside and out. So it's able to take that knowledge to external developers and show them how best to use the product. But also you're going to be someone that understands what it's like to be a developer and understands what it's like to actually use the product. And you can then relay that back to internal teams as well. So you're going to be able to say, well, actually, what about this feature? I think this feature should be a priority, or there's a bug here that external developers have been reporting, and I think it's really important. You're going to have a good idea of the mindset and the kind of profile of who's using your software. So it's advocation both ways, really. Ultimately, the goal as a developer advocate is to help developers be successful with the tools and products that the company that you're working for is offering. This will inevitably kind of fall over those 3 C's, which is why it's often the first hire, or very early on, you'll build a team of developer advocates, because unlike other roles like community managers or technical writers who are much more specialized, developer advocate will touch on everything. Or at least within the team will touch on everything. As to how much of each thing you'll touch on very much depends on the company that you're working for and the type of product that they're offering. A company, for example, might have a very, very small market. They might only have maybe 100 developers in the world using their product, and that's all they need to be a successful company. But if that's the case, you're not really going to be very focused on community. There's no point in trying to build a community if the community is going to exist of 5 people and none of them are interested in meeting up anyway. But that kind of product might require a very in-depth documentation. It might need lots of sample code, and you might have a more one-to-one relationship with those developers, guiding them and helping them make sure they're using the tools correctly. On the flip side, a company might have a very large community. You might find that you've got thousands of developers. Take something like Unity. There are thousands of developers using it. So therefore, you've already got that huge community, and you're going to be much more focused on events, outreach. You can, developer conferences, that kind of thing, because there is that kind of ability to attract a wider audience. You might also find that because of that, a lot of your documentation is already kind of pre-approved, essentially. So because you've got so many people viewing the documentation, any issues will often be found much more quickly. And therefore, your focus day to day won't necessarily be so much on the documentation, because once it's written, it's written. That is until, of course, you release a new version and break everything. But up until that point, your focus might not be so much on the documentation. And the result of this is it doesn't matter what area you're focusing on, what company you're working for, what the product is, you're becoming a conduit for information to flow in and out of the company. You'll be there to understand the developer's needs, what changes are needed in the product, and how to improve it. You'll also be there to relay the information outwards when changes are made, when there are new features and you want to demo those new features, when there are bug fixes and you want to shout that, hey, look, we've actually fixed this. We're listening to you. We understand. And that brings us to why. So, why is this important? what is this actually going to help for a company? Well, it's definitely been proven that time and time again, if a company has a friendly, accessible tech team, adoption is going to go up. People want to use a product that is well documented. I'm sure every one of us has had a situation where they've tried to use an API or something and there's no documentation, or it's very poorly written and you just spend hours tearing your hair out and you'll do everything you can not to use it. People want documentation. And they want somewhere that they know they can go to ask for help, whether that's a forum, a Discord community, whether that's on social media, whether that's through a Stack Overflow tag, whatever it is. They want to know that there is that safety net there, that if something goes wrong, they can ask for help and they're going to get help. The thing with traditional marketing is that that just doesn't happen. It's hard to preserve and grow community if your main focus is sales or adoption rates. It's hard to provide the technical support if you don't have a technical background and you don't understand the problems that developers are facing. So often in a traditional setup where you'll have a marketing department and you'll have a support department, it creates that kind of slowdown of information flow. So if someone asks for help and they've asked through the marketing, because that's who's running the social media, marketing's then got to go over to the support team, and the support team might say, oh, you got to raise a ticket for that. And there's this kind of constant churning of bureaucracy that ends up meaning that the actual person that's asked that help has had to wait 2 weeks to find out an answer. And they've already been annoyed enough that they've gone off and found some other way of doing it. So having a team of people that have a technical background and have direct communication with those developers, even if in the end they do have to go off and ask for someone else internally in the company, chances are they can provide a much better experience for the developer. And that kind of results in the developers feeling like their voices are being heard. And that's always a good thing. People like to feel like they're being listened to and heard, and that will help communities grow. People will then start to feel compelled to contribute back if they feel like they're being cared and respected. They'll start to maybe work on their own local community groups, fostering more involvement from other people. They might write blog posts and articles about your software and how it's amazing and how good it is. And those kinds of recommendations and work is just priceless, because nothing is better than someone that isn't actually related to the company saying how good a product is. People will listen to that way more than anyone that's actually part of the company, because at the end of the day, you're being paid to say it's good. You can be as impartial as you like, but if you're working for a company, people are going to assume you're being, biased. So as I kind of hammered over and over, this is all about bridging that gap between the company and the community, particularly with large companies, that the community efforts tend to be completely separate from the company. They tend to be run by volunteers and they tend to be their own entities. DevRel allows a bridge from that to the company itself. It allows for communities to communicate back to the main company, and it may allows for the main company to provide resources and assistance. So to make sure that things like organizing events, that there are budgets to allow for whatever really you might want at your event. And that's very important because, again, it makes the communities feel like they are wanted and cared for. So is DevRel and developer advocacy for you? Well, I'll often say this question that we kind of get a lot, and people always ask, well, what is it? What do I have to actually do? What do I have to have? I think it's always really good if you've got a passion for communities. You enjoy contributing back to projects, whether that's open source or community efforts. You like to present your ideas to other people, or even just attend events and absorb information from other people. I think in a one-line thing I like to say is, are you a developer that likes to talk? because there's plenty of them that don't. Plenty of developers will much rather just sit in a room, be told what to do and write code, and they love it, and that's fine. But if you're a developer that, hey, actually likes to share their ideas and wants to be heard, it's a great place to be. You've also got the opportunity within DevRel for working in a wide range of products and projects. If your company has something like Huawei has hundreds of products, and you can have that ability to move around and become experts at things that interest you. You can also find that even if you're only working on one product, the different projects that you have can be enormous. You might one day find yourself writing a presentation to talk about developer advocacy, and then the next day you're writing a sample Android application. You might then be jumping on to an event online and helping manage that event. You could be writing some documentation, and you see the list goes on, and you can actually find yourself working on something completely different every day, which for some people is really great. And for me personally, it keeps me engaged, it keeps me interested. And of course, the other thing is you can have a real impact on a company's product. Because you understand the product so well, you can point out things that could be improved, things that could be changed, and not just necessarily from a technical point of view either. You can help foster a better management style throughout the company. You can help improve the company from the inside, and that can be a really great feeling as well. So if any of these things are kind of interesting you and sparking your interest, DevRel might genuinely be the place for you. Of course, it's always nice to have other reasons to get into the market. And sometimes, we do have to think about, well, actually, hang on a minute, are there jobs and how much do they pay? So there has been a massive growth in the market over the last kind of, well, basically, I'd say from about 2017. So there is a yearly state of developer relations report. These are some statistics from last year's. This year's is still in review. But what we're seeing is 15% of DevRel teams now have over 100 team members. That's compared to just 1% in 2017. Mid-sized teams have also grown. So people between 6 and 50 members have grown from 5% to 9%. And we're also finding that the opportunities are spreading across the world. Traditionally, DevRel was something that really only Silicon Valley venture capital invested companies could afford to do, or the big tech giants. But now we're actually finding that more and more companies across the whole world are adopting this idea of DevRel. US is still very strong. About 50% of teams are still based there, but there are opportunities around the world. And a lot of the larger companies will have worldwide teams now. So there's lots of opportunity for travel and also even relocation, if that was something that was interesting. There's just a constant stream of jobs. I'm on a couple of job boards and we ourselves are also hiring, but what I'm seeing is just a non-stop stream of new DevRel positions throughout the kind of from junior through senior. And there are very few people that are actually active in the market looking for jobs. A lot of DevRel people, they'll find a job they like and they'll stick with it, which is nice. But it does mean that there's an awful lot of jobs available for new people that are wanting to break into the market. So, of course, we all have to think about, well, how much does this pay? There's no point in thinking about it if it pays significantly less than maybe a developer job that you're also interested in. Well, having a look at the developer salary survey, which was just released a couple of weeks ago, we can see that for last year, 2020, the US market is still the strongest on average. You can get a range of, on average, 125K to 175K. But across the world, entry, mid, and senior positions are seeing very strong salaries now as well. So entry level across the world averages between 50 to 75K, mid-level 75 to 150, and senior from 125 to 175. It's also worth noting that a lot of senior positions in the US reported much higher salaries of up to about 250K, if not higher. There is a significant market here, and because there is a lot of demand for this, salaries are going up. People are willing to make more money, and companies are seeing the value. So even though they might be paying significantly more now, they're still getting a lot of value out for those people. So what do you actually need to get into DevRel? Well, most of the time you need a good technical background. Someone that's got, say, 3 or so years of technical experience can get straight into a mid-level position. It's kind of a direct transfer, but there are junior positions available. And as the market is growing, more and more junior positions are available. People are coming straight out of college and going straight into DevRel positions, because fundamentally, if you've got a passion for a particular product or tech space, that's more important than what you currently know. You're going to be taught about the specific product anyway on the job. So as long as you've got that kind of drive and willingness to learn and improve, there's no reason why you can't get a job in DevRel. No one's going to be good at every aspect. A lot of people are coming straight, like myself, from a technical background. So they're not going to have that public relations experience. They're not going to necessarily have spoken at thousands of events and be well versed in that sort of thing. But that's something that you can improve on. And as long as you're willing to review your weaknesses and openly say, yeah, I need help with this, I need to improve. That's what these companies are here for. That's what the senior developer relations, that's what people are there for. That's what your team are there to do. And certainly in a larger team, you know, you might be very good at one thing, and that's great, because there might not be another person that's very good at that one thing in your team. So there's nothing wrong with not being good at everything. And I can't say it enough, junior positions are something that is still very new, but it really is growing. If you've got that technical drive and want to learn, I'm very confident that there is a role already available somewhere. So if you are interested in more, there are a couple of links here that I kind of either mentioned during this presentation or are just really interesting articles on the subject. The slides can also be found at my GitHub, so don't feel like you've got to write down all these links because they are quite long. Feel free to pop over to my GitHub and you'll find the link. The slide document is just a markdown file, so you'll be able to get those very easily. But I would just say thank you very much. If you are interested in kind of learning more about myself, following what I'm up to, please do take a look at my Polywork link, which basically provides all my social links and also a timeline of events and podcasts and videos and everything else that I'm getting involved in. So yeah, I think that's where we'll wrap it up, and thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you a lot. If you want to go and take your slides down, and we'll just chat, and that way we can just go back and forth. I put some of those last links in the chat so they get saved with everything as well. So that's great.
Brilliant.
And I know I have a few questions to ask, but if anybody else does, feel free to go ahead and, you know, either type it in chat, raise your hand, or just chime in. Oh, I see a hand from Jacob. That was the I'm going to do it in my camera versus the virtual hand. So Jacob, go ahead. I'll let you go with the first question.
Yeah, we don't need that digital software stuff. So thanks for the talk. That was really nice. I was writing down questions as you were going, and by the end, I had to delete all of them. You really covered a lot of material really well. But the one thought I had is, you know, somebody who really loves coding and really never enjoyed the documentation part. As a matter of fact, I took a position once where it was a grad position, but they gave me a project that said, document all of this, everything. Right. I was like, well, I didn't have any care about that product. I didn't even know what the product was. I was like, do it. And it was like kind of boring. So my first thought was like, I can imagine some software development teams loving having these folks on their team so they don't have to worry about it. That's maybe not what they're interested in. But then I could imagine some people maybe, I mean, this is what I'm asking you, I guess, is how many people, if you're drawing from internally, from your development team, do they ever come up to that position because they like love that part of it?
Yeah, I think that does happen. I think in large companies where you've got that space to move about, I think people can discover that actually it's that areas that they are more interested in, and coding might kind of become a second a second thing to them because they actually love the knowledge share. And yeah, that does happen. There's no reason to say, I'd say from a developer point of view, it can definitely be something that's very easy to transition into, as long as you've got that kind of willingness to do those sorts of things. There's no point in getting into DevRel if you absolutely fundamentally do not want to ever write documentation.
Well, and I guess as a follow-up to that, let's say somebody moves into that position, or either internally or externally, and over time they're coding less and they're doing this community stuff and they're doing this other, documentation. Is there ever a point where it's like, well, you don't know it well enough to document it, or like you just have to work? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I think part of a good DevRel team is making sure that that coding ability is maintained. So while you might not be writing production ready code, it's making sure that you are using the product, basically. So you are writing example projects, you are writing code snippets. You might even be getting involved in things like code reviews and other sort of elements of the development cycle to keep yourself fresh. Because yes, it is a danger that you can kind of drift so far away from it that you're kind of moving out of a developer role entirely. So yeah, it's something you have to be conscious of and something you have to kind of try and maintain.
Well, thanks again. Good talk.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thank you.
Excellent. Oh, I'll do another question, then I'll let somebody else jump in. I'm going backwards in time to the beginning of your talk here. Not quite all the way. I have a question for that later. But what did you do? What, just as your background, I know you mentioned working in Android coding and development or whatever for like 10 years, whatever. What kind of stuff did you work on? Was it, was it applications? Was it games? Was it combination? Like what stuff did you work on? Just give us a little background.
So my actual degree was computer game design with computer science. So initially there was a lot of game involvement. But what I found is basically in my final year of university, I started freelancing, and I kind of ended up falling into the category of writing Android and iOS applications. Some of those were games, but a lot of them were sort of small companies that wanted an application to streamline something or, to something customer focused. So I ended up freelancing for about 6 years doing that, and kind of got sucked into that because coming out of university, it was nice. I was making a lot more than a junior position, and I could make my own hours, and it was. But eventually, burnout hits, and you realize that you're working far more than a normal person. And so I then sort of moved into a more traditional space. I actually worked on a project for quite a few years, actually on the Android operating system side of things. Developing a custom version of Android and facilitating the ability to run sort of GNU Linux applications within a container environment within Android.
Oh, interesting.
And there was a project, it was actually a company in Australia that I worked with. And the idea was basically it was going to be an Android tablet that could be your office computer.
Okay.
So it was going to be able to run like a full LibreOffice suite and everything else.
Gotcha.
It was an interesting product.
Android still needs to get that out. They're still not quite on that level yet.
No, it's not quite happened, and there's definitely something that would be great to happen.
Oh yeah.
And then basically the position before I moved into DevRel was actually for a warehouse management software company, and so that was basically developing Android apps that would be used in a warehouse. So it was kind of a range, really. Definitely sort of drifted out a bit.
That's very cool. Excellent. Does anybody else have a question before I've got a few, so I mean I could go, but anybody else have a question they want to ask before I ask more? No? All right. I'm going to go back even further then to the very beginning of your slides, and just because when I saw it, I was like, all right, this was a topic that might resonate with people depending on how you meant it. But basically your subtitle to your talk, kind of a Dr. Strangelove riff, right?
Oh yes.
But it's about getting comfortable with public speaking, and we already talked a little bit about documentation. But so was that something that you were comfortable with at all times? Was it something you became comfortable with at a certain point in your career? How did that comfort develop, right? Because I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I know from our students' standpoint, and from even from my own from way back, like that takes time for people. So if there were things that you did or things that you fell into that worked well for you, I think that would be a really cool topic for people to kind of hear a little bit about.
Yeah.
So
Sure. Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it was like you said, it takes a lot of time, but I think what it was is having personal passion projects
Mm.
and presenting those in my own free time to people. I did a talk at FOSDEM, which is a big open source conference in Europe. I think that was in my final year of university, and that was kind of the first thing that I'd done public speaking, and I don't think it went very well. But the thing was, people were interested in the topic, and so even though my presenting skills were terrible, people came up to me at the end and were like, "Oh, that was really cool. Oh, that's really interesting," and wanted to know more. And that was a great confidence boost. And I think that's the thing is, I think targeting things that you have a passion for, it's a lot easier for people to be engaged and interested because they can see that passion. It doesn't matter. You can be the worst public speaker in the world. If you have a passion for something, people are going to engage. And that in itself then becomes a massive confidence boost. So I definitely say if it's public speaking is something you want to get into, find things that you are interested in and find events that are happening, smaller local events. I mean, everywhere these days has events because you can go do them online and present your ideas. And you don't have to be an expert on the thing. You don't have to be the top person in that field at all. If you've got a passion for it, people will listen. I think that's the key.
Gotcha. Yeah, I became comfortable more so with talking to people from retail experience. So I guess my passion is disappointing people. So that resonated with me. Let's see. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to keep going down my list of stuff. So what I found interesting, because I've worked in the game industry myself for a while before we came to work here at the university, and it's interesting because you mentioned several different elements of what makes dev relations, and I think to some degree, you myself even and others, they may look at it like, oh, isn't that this? Like, have you found like aren't there other positions or other roles within a company where you feel like at best they're complementary, right? Account managers, things like that, right? Or at worst you might be stepping on toes, right? Like, oh wait, what are you doing, right? Or marketing, right? Because hey, what are you doing throwing all this stuff up there? How have you seen, maybe you haven't experienced it because maybe the company you're at is good at this, but have you seen where in the community there's this kind of either shift to make it more called out as these groups all kind of do this, or it is its own thing, or they're fighting? Have you seen any of that kind of, because there's obviously roles that cross over in multiple areas.
Definitely. I think it's something that could be very different. That happens a lot. Firstly, I think it does definitely happen. I think when a company is well established and decides they want to bring DevRel in, you can be going into quite a hostile environment because you are coming in and telling other departments that what they're doing is wrong, basically. So it could be difficult, and you can get a lot of tension. And I think it speaks a lot for a company that doesn't have those issues, because sorry about the sirens, I don't know if you can hear that, but it happens. But you can see it happen quite a lot. I think it's important for a company to kind of establish the boundaries and say, look, this is the responsibility of DevRel. This is the responsibility of marketing. This is the responsibility, because they all still have their place. It's not like DevRel's coming in and taking over everything. It's just very, very difficult for a company to define that, and incredibly important to do it, because if they don't, that's where you do get the infighting and the, oh, well, marketing wants to do this, but we want to do it like this, and the headaches start. So yeah, it's something you've got to be careful with. But I think something that Huawei seems to do very well, and I think a lot of companies are spending a lot of time on making sure those are defined. Or on the flip side, you're joining a company that's brand new or very small, it's much easier because they won't necessarily been having much emphasis on those
Right.
things anyway. So
No, that's great. Yeah, no, I asked because like back in the day when we started doing mobile games, we had to like learn like the people at the different, the App Store and the Google Store, and those folks that are probably more account managers than they were relations, but they were different kind of relations, right? Like,
yeah.
And we're always like, well, they're gonna hopefully give us a little information so we know when to release, and we're gonna send them swag, and that's a different type of element, but it's part of what you do, which I think is very cool. So given that your current company, which sounds like they handle it well, and I know they're probably more well known overseas. Where are you getting most of your developers that you are doing dev relations with? Like what parts of the globe, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so
and I have a follow-up after that.
okay, sure. So I mean, Huawei's structure is kind of quite unique because obviously it's a Chinese company, but it's a company that wants to be a worldwide known entity. So they actually have research labs in the UK, in Turkey, in Germany, and then also in Russia, and I want to say India, somewhere like they're all over. So while we as a team directly report back to headquarters in China, we're actually working with teams from all over the world. So the core development teams are still based in China, but a lot of what we're doing is obviously relaying feedback and information to the research teams, to the teams that are thinking up of the next best thing that's going to happen. So we speak a lot with these other sort of research hubs that happen. So it's a very multicultural and multi language situation where we do definitely have quite a lot of language barriers to get around, but it's fun, it's interesting.
And this is the follow-up question, and then I know you have to be political about it, but I mean, obviously because of where your parent company is and various things and how the countries of the world get along, has politics or some of the different ways the countries interact, has that had any kind of effect on your ability to work with developers in various places?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the biggest is basically the GDPR and the European regulations. We have a lot of situations where the core developer teams in China are completely physically unable to access data in Europe. It's something that a lot of people think, oh, everything is going sent back to China. Huawei's collecting everyone's information. It's not the case. In fact, it's the complete opposite, to the frustrating level of if a developer team in China wants to test on a test server in Europe, they can't. They're not allowed. It has to be transferred through a team in Europe and all organized in that sort of way. And things like machine learning training data has to stay in Europe, has to stay in China. So it's definitely a barrier that's quite interesting to have to work with and kind of navigate.
Gotcha. And Jacob asked a question in chat. I'll just read for him. I mean, it may be because you talked about they're dealing with all these teams anyways, right? Is this a position that can easily be virtual, remote work, working with this? You mentioned travel and in some cases, like how much of your time is just always behind a screen talking to people, chatting on Discord or wherever, and how much do you actually go and physically meet with teams or developers or different research centers and things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say internally, it's pretty much all virtual. We have quite a strong sort of virtual, even before COVID hit, it was quite a strong virtual situation. So we do have an office in London that I do go to, but all the sort of communication that is done is all done virtually. We have internal chat systems and all that sort of fun stuff. So it's a big virtual element. And I think outside of Huawei, yes, it can be very virtual from a internal company point of view, but from from talking with a community point of view, I think historically it was a lot of travel. Historically, you were going to events a lot, like 50% of your time might be travel. but that's kind of shifting, and we're moving into a world where events are becoming more hybrid, and so the travel is becoming more localized. So whereas traditionally I might have been traveling all around the world, I probably don't really travel outside of Europe anymore. That is, so I still get to travel, and it's still nice. You know, I will be going to Paris in a couple of weeks' time, Berlin in a few weeks after that. So there's quite a lot of nice travel, but it is more localized. It is kind of within a continent, and I would say the same with sort of in the US, whereas you might be traveling to the Europe and that sort of thing, you'll probably expect to find that you're doing a lot more internal travel to different states as opposed to different countries.
Okay. Any last questions from anybody in the audience, from any of our folks here? I got to ask most of mine, and apparently I didn't turn off my thing for my phone. So I don't see anybody raising their hand. I don't see anybody talking there, so I think we're okay. I want to thank you for coming out and doing this fine chat. I think that, like you said, the more people will find out about this, the more they're going to find that it's an actual very interesting position. And like you said, it's very needed, right? It's when you stop to think about it, like, you see companies doing all this, you may not think of them doing it as this is the role, or this is what it's called, or this is this, but you understand that it's needed, right? I mean, you look at, like you mentioned, Unity, and I know our students and all these other folks, you know, they're very familiar with all the different resources out there for them, right? And not even probably thinking about like who did that or where it came from or how that's done. So I think that's very interesting. So thank you so much for coming out and doing this. If you ever, you know, want to do something together in the future, or we can do something to help you, always feel free. For those who are watching this later or whatnot, I posted the links in there. You can reach out and see some of his work and presentations that he mentioned earlier. And then we have 2 more speaker series coming up over the rest of the semester. One on October 27th. It's the challenge of creating games on your own versus at a game studio. And it's from Bob Bates, who's been in the business for decades and worked for Zynga, worked on his own, has done tons and tons of stuff. Great friend to the VSGI, and he's going to be doing that talk. Then one of the CEOs of one of our resident companies that graduated is going to do a talk on the metaverse and how entertainment is merging and doing more together, and that'll be on November 10th. And so we thank everybody for watching this, whether it's live or later. And again, thank you so much, Zachary, and thanks Stephanie for bringing it to our attention. And with that, we're going to call it a day.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Cool.
Great being here. Cheers.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Very good information. You can go ahead and stop it if you want, Mike.